going to get started here. Thanks to all of our panelists for coming. My name is Chris Nichols, and this is a joint project of TaylorMade and the Garrett County Historical Society to start getting the stories and memories and just all the special things about Deep Creek Lake on video, recorded, so that people from the next generation and people who can't make it to these events can really connect and enjoy all of these great stories. So we brought together 4 esteemed panelists who are steeped in the history of Deep Creek Lake. And this isn't any sort of academic forum or anything. This is just a chance to hang out and talk. I'll have some questions maybe to kind of get things going. We've got a little trivia test with the coveted prize to the winner of the trivia contest.
We'll probably donate that to the museum.
Maybe. This is genuine silver color here on this trophy. So yes, we're just going to kind of keep this informal, and I'll keep the ball rolling if we just kind of run out of things to talk about on a certain topic. But let's just go through and maybe everyone introduce yourself. So Beverly.
I'm Beverly Raley Robinson. My father was Charles, known as Bud Raley. He died just about a year and a half ago. And he was a history lover, which is ironic because he didn't even know his grandparents on either side. But he loved to type, and I have lots of pages of things that I would never have known if it weren't for Bud.
Ed?
I'm Ed King, and I'm a product of Bob Bowl getting me here because I do not consider myself a historian, but I did write a book on famous boats on Deep Creek Lake. And that's when Bob got a hold of me and said, Ed, you got to write a book about the history of Deep Creek Lake and so on and so forth. And I put him off for 3 years, but about that time this arm was twisted so hard that I gave up. And it took me about 3 years or so to write Deep Creek Lake, The Founders. And I'm in the process now of writing this second book of history, targeting the 100th birthday of the lake, which will be sometime in March or April of 2025. And I've got to coordinate that exact date because I think there's different people think it was a little bit different. But anyway, that's who I am. Person that got wrapped into this, and I'm enjoying it.
I'm Karen Frazee Myers. My family has been in Garrett County. Well, I'm a 9th generation native Garrett Countian. I did not grow up on Deep Creek Lake. I spent a little bit of time there, and my dad was nearly run over by a boat, and so Deep Creek was too dangerous for us. And this was in the 1950s. But came back to the lake pretty quickly in the 70s. We all did, and I've spent a lot of time here. So it's a great place. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you. Ann?
I'm Ann Smith. My grandfather, and I want to stress this is on my mother's side. My mother was a Smith who happened to marry a Smith. They were not first cousins. My father was from St. Louis. He actually came to the area when he left the FBI in World War I to become an attorney for Alcoa. And he came down, kind of a tag along with some people who wanted to buy a lot at Deep Creek. And they asked, where should we ask for about a lot? And they were directed to Old Man Smith at the end of Glendale Bridge. And that was my grandfather, Fulcher Perry Smith, known mostly by Pete. I suppose some people called him Vulture, but that was not common, and certainly not in my family, where they didn't say it to us. But that's how my parents met. It was love at first sight, and my grandfather was one of the original investors when the property went up for sale after the lake was created from, I believe, Eastern Land Corporation, had the lake and what is now Youghiogheny Mountain Club. And then he divvied the property up between his 5 kids. It included what we now know as the bulk of Marsh Hill, Road, Marsh Mountain, the lakeside of Marsh Mountain, Stockslager, for those of you that know Stumpy Point, Lakeshore Drive. Quite a bit. It is Cherry Creek State Park at one point belonged to my grandfather, 1,000 acres, Purgeon Farm, and Blakesley was named after it was Colonel Blakesley in the Revolutionary War. It was a family name, my mother's middle name, that's how it got its name. And we still, at least for a little while, have a few hundred acres on the lake that under Blakesley LLC, so
Okay. Thanks, Ann.
there's a lot of property.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna jump in with our first trivia question here. So our question is, what was the year of construction for the oldest house in the watershed? So this is according to the CAMA, the property assessment database. So this may or may not be true, but this is what the state of Maryland thinks. So the oldest still standing structure in the watershed is 1855, 1875, 1905, or 1925. So write down your answer on your slip of paper.
We write our name on this paper too.
No, I'll keep track here.
Oh, okay.
We have supercomputers tabulating the score of this competition.
You're talking about
Is
the
this a
watershed.
county?
The watershed.
The watershed.
Yes, the watershed of the lake.
District 18.
Essentially, yes. Yeah. Everybody got an answer? Okay. So the correct answer is 1855.
What's
And
that?
if you're really interested, it's a property off of Mayhew Road there. Probably an old farmhouse that's been added on. Maybe there's a chimney left of something or other on there, but it's interesting if you really want to dig into all the actual little areas of where they were built. You can kind of see that there were certain areas that got built right when the lake was flooded, right in the 30s, and then as properties got sold off, they kind of developed each little chunk differently.
What house is it down there?
We'll have to dig into that because I didn't have time to really look at exactly what house it is.
So all the red dots on that map, those are other old structures?
Those are all things that have a date in that database prior to the lake, so prior to 1925.
Prior to 19.
So what everyone put up for their answer?
Because I think the Ingman Tavern.
Right? That may not be in the watershed.
Yes,
what
it is.
Okay.
It's on Styling Church Road.
Okay. So that may be,
He has the right answer.
he does. Okay. So that
Let's just say I.
Did anyone else have the right answer?
No, I had 20
Okay.
years later.
I did.
I went with the 75 also. I went with after the Civil War.
I went with A.
Okay.
Oh, of course.
So we'll just break it up every so we only have 4 of those questions. But the first question to kind of get the ball rolling is, what's your first memory of Deep Creek Lake? What's the first time you remember doing something, seeing something on the lake?
Well, my first memory, I would have been probably 2 or 3, and that would have been about 1951 or 52. And I was born in Baltimore, but we came back to Garrett County, which my dad's family's been here since forever, and the 1700s, before it was Garrett and all that. But I remember that because I lived above Stone Tavern, which is probably somewhere, and my grandparents' house was there, and I was there all the time with my grandmother and grandfather, and my grandfather used to take me every place around Deep Creek Lake that was there in the early 1950s, and so that would be about it for me. So I'd say 51.
Okay.
Well, I don't remember an awful lot about it, but my parents, well, first of all, my father worked on the dam, and he had a soft spot for camping and Deep Creek Lake. And my parents have told me that my first visit to Deep Creek Lake was at Cherry Creek in a baby buggy. And I remember very vividly the old Packard 7-passenger car that we had. and where we camped. And that was 1933.
And that was when there was no state park camping there. It
There was
just,
no state park, and many places along Rock Lodge Road, the old road went down into the pond or what was flooded.
Right.
So this asphalt thing went down and went into the lake. Those were real nice places to camp. I remember one on Rock Lodge Road. It had an apple tree on it, and it must have been somebody's front yard or so.
Right.
And we camped there several times.
Karen?
So, I don't remember when my dad was nearly run over by a boat while he was water skiing.
Just as
But,
well.
but yeah, just as well. But I think it was probably around 1956 or 57 or 58, somewhere in that range. But my first memory really is when Route 219, the current alignment of 219, was being built. And it was quite a big construction project.
Yes.
And I think that was probably around 60 or 61. Do you remember? It could have been anywhere from 1959 to 1961, probably in that range. And the story is, and this is not the lake, but this was the ride of my life. My grandparents had an automobile that had been in Oakland at the repair garage. And my aunt, who's 10 years older than I, so she was probably 17 or 18, 16 or above, was to drive it back, and I was her passenger. Well, we didn't know what was wrong, but the throttle stuck. And here we were on this brand new road that was barely open, and she didn't know what to do, and she kept trying to put her foot on the brake and so forth. So finally, she did have the presence of mind to turn the key off. And we ended up stopping very close to where the intersection with Gravelly Run Road is. It turns out that the repair garage had left a screwdriver somewhere near that slid in to the carburetor, I guess. And that was a harrowing ride. And I do think of that, well, especially when I lose cell phone service there, because there is a little bit of a dead spot there right now. And I do think of that, often. Yeah. But I've had many, many wonderful times since then, and not so much excitement on the road.
That's good. That's good.
Wow.
Ann?
I'm sorry I didn't bring it, but I have sitting on my desk. I'm cleaning out a house here in Oakland that I've owned. That it's a picture of all my grandparents, their children, and all the grandchildren. And I was the baby that my grandmother was holding. But I've got that picture. And if one, I'm sure there are quite a few copies around. Everybody in the family has them. But then I also remember at my grandmother's, and that would be the house that you eventually bought, tore down, except for part of it, that you incorporated into your house, at the end of Glendale Bridge heading towards the state park. And there's a big old heavy, I don't even know what it's made out of, frog doorstop that I was told not to play with, and somehow I did, and my brother and I did. I'm sure I couldn't lift it. I think my brother did, and it was dropped on my toe. So that was a memory. That was a memory.
Frog, like a big metal frog, I guess. Yeah.
I don't know if it's to be honest with you, it's still at the door to one of the bedrooms down at one of the houses down at the lake, and I should grab it and take a look. I just got to look at it now. I was like, I'm not getting near you. It's that bad a memory. It's.
If I can tag on
to
to her. So she mentioned that, yes, the house that her granddad owned, then I later purchased, and we were doing it, Phil Silky did a whole new design for it, but the house was nearly finished until your Aunt Connie and Uncle Joe came over, and he took me around by the hand, because there was a little utility building, but it had fieldstone on it as well. And her granddad, I think, did all of that fieldstone work himself. I used to think that he laid all the patios too, but some of our uncles told me that's a lie, because Granddad put them all to work, and they all had wheelbarrows. They all lifted the rocks, and they all did that. But anyway, in the stonework on that building that is still there, he shaped his dog's head. And so you can see the collar and the shape and the nose and the ears and everything. He did that, and I didn't even realize it, but then I've often enjoyed taking people there to see that because it's such a nice
I
memory.
remember, and it was a Weimaraner, and I remember being on a rescue squad call to your house. I think it was for your husband's mother.
Mhm.
And I said, that was my granddad's dog. And you're looking at me, yeah, you're right.
There it is.
And I think that house was probably built
It was in the 40s.
around 1950.
It was in the 40s. My
Well,
parents.
it could have been.
Oh, I guarantee it was because it was their real estate office in the 40s. They lived up here on Green Street,
Okay,
but that was a
well,
real estate office.
I would
My
go
parents
along
met
with
there
that.
about 45 and they were married in 47 or 48.
Because where the big fireplace is out there
It was a three.
was our
Yeah.
favorite camping place.
The outdoor one out,
Way out.
on the buffer strip.
with the big
Next to
outdoor
the
barbecue.
brick
Yeah,
house.
that was our favorite picnic place.
But
Yeah.
one summer we came back, and by golly, there was a house there. Now
You came
That
back
was
to
my
camp.
granddad. That was my granddad. Yeah.
I wasn't old enough to drive, so 33 plus 14, that's 47.
Yeah,
So
That's
probably
about right.
47 to 48 is
and that was
what-
their real estate office. Well, they lived in what people know as Doc Gibson's house. But it was really my grandparents, my mother's wedding
It was a
pictures are
boat
on the
dealer place
banister.
too, didn't he? The big room was like a showroom for boats, I was told.
That was later. Homer
That was
Bennett.
later. Oh, okay.
Homer.
Homer, I didn't even know if he showed boats or anything. Homer,
No, but it looked like a showroom.
it did, and it was shut off in the winter because of all the plate glass. But they had an incredible fireplace that had 3 openings: one into a family room, one
Still
into
there.
that big living room, and one to the outside.
We enclosed the outside one, so it opened then into 3 rooms. But you have to seal that chimney every year, or it will leak through the ground.
It was
That
interesting to hear you talk about having the real estate office in the house because that's what Lakeside Park was originally. It was half of a restaurant and half of, where my
Yeah.
dad moved when he was 4 or 5 from the Raley General Store at McHenry, which fortunately Leo Ricci took a nice picture of. Really appreciate that. And he moved there, but that was the office. And even when I was young, they would have boat launching and speedboat rides and all that kind of stuff. And I could go collect money. I can remember how neat that was, that my grandmother would say, oh, just keep the $1 for boat launching or whatever. And I was like, this is great, because sometimes I had sometimes I had to help. But all the people came there, and that's where the brochures went out from and all that stuff, and I would help.
Well, if you follow this back, my mother graduated from college in 43. As I recall, we're talking World War II, and they didn't have the money for sheepskin. So it had to be paper or something. But when she came back, she was my dad's secretary. She typed up all the deeds. But then you start getting into a whole nother fascinating area of tying in Oakland with Walter Dawson and senior Fred Thayer before the Fred Thayer, that Diane's husband that we knew, and all of those people that wrote the deeds. And that's a whole nother absolutely fascinating
just how
area.
They blended their work and their home life, and the kids slept upstairs, but downstairs is this restaurant with marble top tables.
At your place, yeah.
Yeah,
My grandparents kept it separate till they
did they?
sold the gifts or the Green Street house and
no,
retired to the lake.
they did,
And a little trivia, a little funny story. Homer Bennett
Yes,
was a nailer,
yes.
and he owned Rollian's furniture store, which is nailers spelled backwards. And he rented that house for several years, around 1965 or so.
No, I actually lived there until about 78 or 79, and it wasn't till 77 was when my grandmother died, at which time my uncle turned and rented it to Homer. So I could put that right to you at 77.
I'm not sure of the dates, but it doesn't
Yeah.
change my story much because Homer Bennett was Garrett County's famous playboy. And
I think
He-
they had quite a few, actually. But we won't go there.
well,
He was
had-
the first divorced board of director on the bank.
That's interesting.
And
Yeah.
he had married Charlie Nelson and his daughter, who had a cottage out close to Toothpick Road. And Mrs. Nelson hated Homer probably more than you can imagine. And the feelings were mutual. So after he and the daughter got divorced was when he was renting the house. And I'm not sure, but it was after I bought the cabin, so I knew what was going on in the neighborhood, but I don't know the dates for sure. Well, anyway, to agitate Mrs. Nelson, Homer had the furniture store and he had these mannequins, and he would put a different mannequin in the picture window of that one room that went out there, some days with clothes on and some days without. And Mrs. Nelson couldn't do a damn thing about it, but she was livid.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember he was the first one to have, do you remember the Volkswagen Thing? It was Volkswagen's equivalent of a Jeep. It was called the Thing.
Yeah.
He was the first one around to have one of those.
Mhm.
But
So that, that's one of my questions, maybe skipping ahead, was what's one of the craziest or most colorful characters you can think of from the Deep Creek heyday? So anyone can jump in.
I think you got to go back to
Bill.
Bill Castile.
Okay, Bill. Yeah, that's your
Bill Castile, I think, and Eddie lived down close to you. And after my granddad, well, I say it a lot, my grandparents, but after my granddad died, I lived with my grandmother so she could stay there in the summertime. But boy, she'd bake something, she'd say, take this down to Bill Castile. And I was scared to death to walk in that house. He had old artifacts and stuff in there, and he was an artifact himself. But
So a little bit of
Scared me.
background that I know about Bill. He was the last horseback riding sheriff
Correct.
of the county.
correct.
He was a realtor, right?
So real estate.
Yep.
What else? What else about? Yeah, because I've heard a lot of snippets about him.
He was my image of
Yeah.
John Wayne.
Oh, was he?
Okay.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. That,
He was a cowboy. He wore big, heavy boots, all kind of turquoise jewelry and stuff. And I visited him once in his apartment on 2nd Street, and it was full of antiques and memorabilia of the West. And he was my idol as a cowboy.
that's a good way to put it.
And didn't he keep a separate house at the lake
Yes, he did.
for his lady friends?
Well, the house that
Or yeah,
Jeff, he
Kimball
never
did.
stayed there because he stayed in Oakland. And it did not have running water. It had an outhouse. And the rumor was that he was dating, can't think of her name right now, but anyway, that really wasn't his girlfriend. But the reason he didn't have running water or any conveniences because he didn't want to attract her family coming down there and spending the weekend. And he was a clever old boy.
Was that Coral?
Coral. I've heard
Was that Coral McRoby?
Coral McRoby?
Corlett was first.
Coral McRoby.
Coral.
Yeah, Cora. Yeah. His real girlfriend was Ashby,
Okay.
and she took care of him in his later days.
Any other characters that we?
Well,
Oh, there's
I
going to be a
would
lot.
say Charlie Moran was a pretty good character.
Oh, yeah.
Charlie and Jim Raley.
Yeah, he was the baby of the family.
They,
He took after his father, perhaps.
they were known to tip a drink or two around 4 o'clock every day. And after Wendell built the Round Bar, they started to meet there. I think 4 o'clock was their time. And this one day they came and they had their special stools so they could swivel around and see the lake. And they could see the whole bar and see who was at the bar. But this one day they got there and there was a man sitting in their stool. So what did they do? They went outside, used their cell phone and called the restaurant, and their phone was way back in the corner. So when the man got up to go answer the phone call, they slipped in, moved his drinks down, and Charlie Moran was the one that set off the fireworks for years and years in his front yard down in Green Glade.
Okay. Yeah.
Ooh, Chris, can we ask questions?
Yes. Jump in.
Do you know how Charlie got his nickname? I don't.
Rooster.
Rooster. That's how I never knew when I was working in restaurants. He was a frequent guest at Will of the Wisp.
He was Rooster.
Rooster. How did that come about? Do you know?
I'm not sure on that.
I have to ask Tom.
I do have the ledger books from Stone Tavern, the credit books, so I can give you the names of everybody who went there. And
Wow.
it was pretty amazing. It's a list of just Garrett County surnames.
Right.
And then you could also see that, gee, they didn't only sell beer and cigarettes, but they had baked beans and toilet paper and candy.
Yeah.
So, but to me, I was interested in seeing guys that I thought probably wouldn't go to like a place that was half a bar and half a restaurant and dance hall, you know.
Right.
So it was like,
Jared, do you know when he got that name?
And I knew so many of them.
When?
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
I mean, was it early in life or later in life?
I only met him when he was older.
Mhm.
I don't think I ever met him before the early 2000s, and he was always Rooster to me. So I don't know the history of the nickname, but we'll have to.
I don't know the history, but I think you probably all sort of remember the rooster that disappeared from Mountain Lake Park where they made fried chicken.
Yeah.
And that's the general area where it showed up or where it landed. And there was a lot of, everybody's kept it pretty quiet about who was involved in the disappearance. And that's why I'm asking the date.
I still want to know who took the hot dog.
Who, what?
Who
That's
took
right.
the hot dog from Kurt's Corner? The hot dog.
Oh my gosh.
I'm getting too modern. Talk about history.
That's definitely not.
Okay, how about a question here?
Oh, no.
So, according to the historical marker on 219, how many named streams feed Deep Creek Lake? Is it 9, 12, 15, or 18?
If
Just
you
write
get
your
this
answer
right,
down
you're
on
in
your
trouble.
I
card
don't
here.
know.
Karen, this was a question you asked new real estate agents.
Yeah, but I'm older now. How can I remember? That was on the paper. You
I
can't.
think I remember the answer. I'll find out.
Well, I only know Deep Creek from like McHenry to the Deep Creek Bridge, so I couldn't possibly.
Oh, couldn't tell the other ones?
The
All right,
information.
everyone have their
if I went a
answer?
little farther.
No, just a minute. I'm thinking.
Okay. Yeah, you can
Wow.
probably
Okay.
think through most of
Can
them.
have an answer.
Mhm. It has to be.
I'd only guess. I could.
Okay. Just pick a letter. Think of it.
I'm going to
The
go
answer
A.
is 12.
12?
B.
Ah, good
Who
guess.
got that?
Oh,
shoot,
the
I
Deep Creek,
got
the
that.
Cherry
Yeah.
Creek, North
Karen,
and
did you get it?
Greenways.
Did you get
No.
it, Beverly? No.
Ed did.
Ed did?
Oh, of course.
Smith and
And-
Look at
Lazar.
his.
I know, I did not.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about all, the many points around.
This was going to be a tiebreaker of how many can you name. So I think most people could name Deep and Cherry Creeks, the Glen Glade,
Piney, Marsh.
Smith Run. I'm not sure where that is.
Lakeshore Drive.
Okay.
No, I
Yeah.
don't remember.
Oh, okay.
Question.
Smith
Where
Mountain
is
is down on
Bull's
Lakeshore
Arm?
Drive.
Bull's Arm Run. Where's Bull's Arm Run?
No clue.
I've seen that on maps.
It's
Southern.
southern and close to Pond Run.
Okay.
That's one I have.
Okay, so many little feeder
Interesting.
Well, and Deep Creek is pretty tricky too because it goes underground. It really starts, you know where the potato barns were off of Sand Flat Road where you turn onto Boy Scout Road?
Yeah.
It really started on the other side, you know,
Okay.
that would be the west side of Sand Flat Road. And then it winds around, and then it becomes the Deep Creek that actually feeds in at the very headwaters of Deep Creek
Right.
up at the end of Purgeon Farm.
Huh.
Do you know how Purgeon Farm got its name?
No. How did Purgeon Farm get its name?
I had an Uncle Perry, and his that was the chunk of land that he inherited from my grandfather, and his wife was Ginny, so therefore it was Per for Perry and Gin for Ginny. Purgeon Farm.
Yeah. Excellent. So, and you briefly mentioned the Blakesley. Was there some more behind that story? Of...
It was a Colonel Blakesley in the Revolutionary War, and I don't know if my grandparents were running out of names. I mean, you had to do something to get away from Fulcher.
Right.
My mother was my mother was Marie Somerville from Lona. My grandmother was Marie Somerville from Lonaconing. But the firstborn was they came up with Perry F. Smith for Fulcher. He got the Fulcher. Where in God's name they got Fanabelle for the daughter, and
what
then
was her name? Sorry.
Fanabelle.
Fanabelle. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I will say that when my mom got Alzheimer's and she was in a nursing home in Pittsburgh, and I'd be up, my dad and I would be down to visit her, and she'd call me Fanabelle.
Did she?
And we would get back up to the apartment where my dad was in independent living, and the first thing is as soon as that apartment door closed was, Dad, all I can say is thank you for not naming me Fanabelle.
Right.
And then there was my mother, Anne, but she became Blakesley because that was an old Revolutionary War name. And then there were the twins, Patty and Connie.
So when the Blakesley was being developed, though, it was purchased from your mom and dad, Anne Blakesley Smith, and
Adrian C.
Yeah.
Kelly.
and I was a real estate broker representing the new developers that Gary Dom was a part of. And there was a lot of debate and dialogue. Well, before they did the Blakesley, they developed what became Penn Cove.
Right.
And in the early
Right.
plats of Penn Cove, it said Pond Run Cove. And because of the reputation of the Pond Run Saloon, I kept saying, no, we're going to try to sell these lots for a lot of money, and we can't have that name. And so it was named Penn Cove. So we had a lot of many meetings and days, and it was really as a tribute to your mother, because it wasn't always an easy negotiation when they were doing the purchase.
Well, it was tough because the people owned GNC, and they went through some. General Nutrition Company.
Oh, that was the other partner.
They had some business issues going on, and that's what. And my father was an attorney, corporate attorney. He was smart enough to build in escalating clauses. If it didn't sell by this date, price went up. If it didn't sell by this date, price went up. And they were all pretty sharp about it, but it was their idea. They asked my mother if she minded.
They asked for permission, but they wanted to honor her because it was a wonderful opportunity, and it had been a grueling process to get.
It was, because hey, I typed up all the documents from my side of the family on one of the first computers where the first disk you put in was your program and the second one was your dad. That was in the 80s. My father would not even come in the bedroom at their home in Pittsburgh where I kept the computer, because he's like, no, I won't have anything to do with it. No. But it was quite a tribute. They were very honored. But I was fascinated that not within the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, I was asked how much my mother had to pay him to name it after her. And I was like, not how it happened. Not how it
Yeah,
happened.
it's so nice to have some unique names like that, because if anything else is named Laurel whatever around here, it's it's Laurel Run, Laurel Way, so it's great to have unique historical themed development names that just gives some things more personality.
I have, this is kind of getting off to the side here, but when you talk about Penn Cove and Pond Run and along that road, my parents had some houses, and I do have the original ledger started by my grandfather, passed on to my grandparents. Now it's in my possession, of the lots that sold along Penn Point Road, back when they were $1,000 a lot.
Wow.
And the first lots, yeah, the first lots in that area where it would be 500 down this year, and it was all handwritten ledger, 500. And the names I still recognize as growing up with in those days, but they were right on Penn Point Road. And if I recall, didn't you build the first house on
And
Penn Cove was a
right on
log?
the point, right on the point.
And didn't you have to take it by boat?
No,
was it the surveyors that went by
we
boat?
didn't. We didn't take it by boat, but when we were showing the property, because there's a stream, Palm Run is there, and you had to get a permit for stream crossing, which back then was easier than it is today, but it still took a long time, a couple of
Right.
years. So when we were marketing and trying to sell those lots, we made a farm road from Sandflat Road to go back through the field to go in that way. And we probably did take materials building the first house on that farm road, but it was a farm road. We didn't.
There was a farm.
we didn't have to
Was
go.
that through the Gosnell farm?
Well, it was Joanne Harvey's parents'
Oh, okay.
farm. Joanne Harvey's parents' farm.
Below where she built recently.
Well, that might be a different Joanne Harvey. I'm talking about Joanne Harvey that was married to Earl Harvey Jr., who was one of the Harvey brothers. He was killed in
I know exactly where
yeah.
you mean. You're talking Sandflat Road, correct?
Sandflat Road.
Okay, let's talk restaurants. So, what was your favorite restaurant that no longer exists, and a favorite item from there, or somewhere it could be favorite food item from somewhere else too. So, don't have anything that comes to mind right
Cabin
now.
Lodge.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Cabin Lodge was great. Yeah, Cabin Lodge was
And
great.
I always heard the chili.
Chili.
Yeah, chili was really good from there.
But they had those little baskets where that had whatever you were getting with it, and the French fries. So those were pretty good too.
Red Run.
Red
Oh,
Run.
yeah.
Yeah.
I got to go with your family. Coming from Pittsburgh when we were just little kids. My father was Catholic, so we were raised Catholic. My mother was not, but at that time, in the early 50s, we had to be raised Catholic, which meant no meat on Friday. And Louis East Cornish ran Stone Tavern. And I just thought it was the coolest thing because as a little kid, we got to sit at the bar.
Oh, did you?
But my mother, who was a Protestant, was the one that had to see that we were raised Catholic, which meant no meat on Friday. So she would say to Cease, would you give the kids spaghetti, but would you strain the meat sauce? Well, I'm not going to lie to you. Cease Cornish, somebody recording this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, she scared something like crap out of me because she would take this dish. I mean, she would oblige to straining the meat out for the little Catholic kids, and she would slam that bowl right down in front of us and say, "Might as well eat the devil as the devil's brew." She scared the crap out of me, and I didn't know what she meant until I was probably 8 or 10, or
Right,
when somebody
right.
explained it to me. I didn't know what she meant, but it had been cooked with meat. Shouldn't be eating that. Cornish was great.
Yeah.
I can't think of any.
Penn Point was.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever went out to eat.
Right. If you,
And
that's where you're working. That's where you just eat.
Yeah, when I didn't, well, we moved away when I was 6. My mother said, no, this sort of lifestyle is not for my family. She had a Baptist preacher grandfather who was at Deep Creek, Ferndale, and Lockland, and they were real close, and she said, no, I think, Bud, we are taking the girls. 2 of my sisters were born here, and I'd been born in Baltimore, and Pop really asked my dad to come back and help run Stone Tavern. And it's interesting now today to hear about the different people because Patty Friend Thompson, her dad was the Leo Friend, the game warden, and he used to chase my sisters all around Deep Creek Lake so they wouldn't speed in the boats. But her parents also were managers of Stone Tavern, and I have menus that have their names on the front, and things cost 15 cents for spaghetti and things like that. So I'm looking at those last night. I was thinking how many different managers they had been. They had from 1932 to 1968, I think it was when it was demolished. But I can remember, being in the kitchen, and we would have been happy to strain the meat out.
Well, I'm sure she was kidding, but I as a little
Maybe
kid,
not.
I didn't know.
Does anybody remember Winlands?
Oh yeah. Oh, I worked when it was Edge of the Lake.
Okay.
That was my first job. Was a dishwasher for
Well, all right,
$6 a day.
little personal, used to my mom. She,
Sitting right here.
Yes.
you worked there. I remember memories of hanging out there while you were working, right?
Yeah.
But that was when it was a gas station.
I worked at the gas station
Okay.
part, and then
There was a
had-
little crazier.
then
Where
had-
part was that?
Well,
It's right at the intersection of Glendale and 219.
Oh,
Yeah, where
okay.
McDonald's is.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
the real estate office was the original building that was originally just a gas station, and then it became a convenience store, and then whatever. But that's where I worked. But then next door was Edge of the Lake,
Oh, yes.
Mm.
was what it was originally.
Yeah.
And my sister worked there when she was in college. And then it became Winlands, and downstairs was a restaurant, and upstairs was a.
Who was your sister?
Nightclub.
Who's my sister?
Yeah,
Judy Coonley.
because I worked with Jane Foreman, Barb Foreman, and Jane Garrett. Chuck Nolan, the retired deputy, his wife is Jane Garrett. We all worked there. It was our first jobs, and it was late 60s and early 70s, and there's a big handwritten sign that Minnie Wolf put on the door. Said, "No hippies, no long hair, no bare feet." And she would watch from the kitchen, that little triangular window, and she'd watch, and something came slamming down or made a bang in the kitchen. You knew somebody came in the door that she didn't approve of, and she'd come out. She didn't care what was in her hand. If she was stirring something, it was a spoon. If she was cutting something, it was a knife. She'd come and rip it out and say, "Get out. Get out."
Wow. I do remember favorite meals, and it was because at home we had just a very civilized household, nice dinners, nice table, all that stuff. But when I would go with my grandfather, if I could be allowed to sneak down to Stone Tavern, I loved the pickled eggs and pickled sausages in the giant jars that sat on the counter. So I would go maybe to Matt's Stories and get a pickled egg, and go to, not Halsey's, but someplace along there, and get bar food. And
Right.
then I'd go home, and my mother didn't know that I was hanging out in these places. So she'd try to give me something really nutritious. But it was always fun, and I had to have Orange Crush everywhere I went, because I brought you my special bottle, because we did not have soft drinks or pop at home. And so when I would go and I'd get an Orange Crush, it was like, oh, it's just heaven. And tea-berry gum was the other thing I could think of. I don't even chew gum now, but in those days, if I could sneak a pack of tea-berry gum, it was really big. So that's my favorite meal stuff.
Audience question. Ed, I think I remember you telling a story about the Deep Creek Lodge. Maybe other places, you were talking about bar food, places to hang out, the Deep Creek Lodge, maybe the old pizza pub.
Oh, pizza.
Any stories from?
Well, at the lodge, their name to fame was the fish sandwich, and the bartender's name was Fats. Nobody knew what his name was. I guess you could research it and find out, but it was Fats. And every Friday night they would have the fish fry, and out on the porch they had a 4-person porch swing. 4 people. Now most porch swings are for 2 or 3 people, but this was extra long. And when they auctioned off things, that was one of the coveted pieces.
His wife.
I don't know what story you might mean.
Maybe for a different time. I was fishing.
I'll tell you a little bit of trivia about the word saloon. During Prohibition and before Prohibition, saloon had a very, very specific meaning. And the meaning was it was tied to the distillery. And they would not sell any other whiskey except that. And they could have sales. The whole idea with the Liquor Control Board was to reduce the amount of liquor being sold and to control it some way. Well, the Tide bar, which was called a saloon, could do just about anything they wanted to, including up to prostitution, to sell more liquor. And right after Prohibition, the name was kind of looked down upon by the Liquor Control Board. Now today, saloon just means the good old days.
Mhm.
Well, I was reading about Prohibition partly because in thinking about Stone Tavern, my grandfather started constructing it when they thought Prohibition was coming to an end. And
Yeah.
it was just a year before it did. And so I had a lot to learn about that stuff myself. But, yeah.
Okay, let's do another trivia question.
Oh, my goodness. These are obviously male questions, Chris.
They are. You know, I'm an engineer, so I like my data, facts, and
You're going to have
figures.
us to guess.
And there is a correct answer for this because someone in this room has hiked this entire length. So, how many miles of shoreline does Deep Creek have? Is it 62, 79, 72, or 69?
Is it on your Apple Watch I could borrow and look at?
The state says something different, but I have the exact number.
Even the artifacts in this room say a different number.
Yeah,
It's not on that
there's
screen.
different.
They're all
there's
they're
spots
different.
in here.
Depends on where you measure it.
So this is kind of a trick
Yeah,
question.
that's
Whether
true.
it's at the buy down line or
Oh, yeah.
down
When-
the
when-
water's
and when-
edge.
Chris's answer.
What's when
Because he walked it.
At
So-
2461 would kind of close your.
that's right. It reduces by the water level as well.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say the answer is 72 miles. So anyone
Wow.
have C? All right.
Yes,
You got it.
but I have the others wrong, so.
Yeah. So right now in our 3 out of 4 questions, Ed and Karen are tied with 2 each. So we got the tiebreaker here.
That's pathetic.
Well, I learned everything from him, except that last answer is, we used to always say it was 65 miles of shoreline. That was
Right.
before we had the chamber, that was the promotion council, that's what it was. But then when DNR went around and assigned us actual dock numbers based on starting at one point, I knew it was over 70
Right.
because of that.
You can
Yeah.
go to the dam, see the license plate number 1 is by the power plant, and over at the end of Bayview Inn is the last one. It's like 72 something.
Something, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a really good thing that they
And
did.
you really did walk the entire
He
shoreline.
did, yeah.
It's
That's the
documented
map
on
of
Facebook.
So it is not scientific, but it's just fun to say that.
It is.
What other questions do I have here?
I have a question.
Yeah,
just
please,
tag
yeah,
on to
jump
the distance.
Yeah.
I met a gentleman who is in the southern part of the lake. I think it was Crow's Point, and he told me he'd owned this lot for 50 years. He said his land was 100 feet out. He had a point, and erosion had completely wasted away a big chunk of his property. And I'm just wondering how, because that distance around the lake, the circumference would have changed over time. I guess as you have the lake kind of eating away at the shoreline, but just any obvious places that you remember, hey, it used to look different, but now.
Oh, I've had DNR. I own 2 houses on Lakeshore, and when they visited last summer, they said the erosion at my frontage was the worst they'd seen on the lake. So we're talking about putting those big wire containers of stones up or
Acabian
something.
baskets,
Is that what they're called?
I think that's what they're called.
Yeah.
It's just the wakeboarding and the waves. It's just absolutely incredible. You can see the feet wash away by the year.
Yeah, there are actually some spots that are getting built up. Very few. Most of them are getting eroded away, but there are some spots that
I'm filling
that
in.
is filling back in too. So it's
So, well, I'll do a little ad here while we're
I
doing
realized as
this.
soon as I said it, I was like, wait.
Did you see the sign on my
I saw you.
out there that said, so at the last PRB meeting, PRB being the Deep Creek Lake Policy and Review Board, they appointed a committee to deal with a couple things, wakes being one, and when we can put our docks in the water being another one. And I ended up volunteering to be on the committee. So anyhow, we're meeting and there's a lot of good representatives. So we met with Eric Knoll at DNR, and everyone was agreeing the wake boats are getting the blame just because that's their name.
Yeah.
However, it's not just the wake boats.
No,
And they
it's not.
started talking about, and Steve Green brought a picture of a boat that he showed it going in front of Traders Landing and High Mountain Sports that was basically plowing. I mean, to us, it's obviously an operator who doesn't know how to operate.
Right.
And so we all said, okay, we need to do more education. So the theme now ends up being Mind Your Wake. I think that probably a large percentage of boaters probably don't know what a wake is, but we're hoping that if they see that phrase, maybe they'll at least ask what a wake is. And there's a video that we got from the Water Sports Industry Association about proper operations, so forth, that the theater is going to show before every movie all summer in July and August. So anyhow, and a brochure is coming out. But anyway, the Mind Your Wake campaign, because we want everybody to learn how to get their boat on plane and have less wake.
Yeah.
And if after you're finished wake surfing or wakeboarding, empty the ballast so that you're not creating more
And
damage.
in fairness, this guy said his land disappeared over 50 years, long before wakeboarding.
Yeah.
It was just.
It seems like that's a
to me,
bit of a stretch, maybe. Would you think, Ed, 100 feet? That he would have lost 100 feet of
The
land?
wake will go much, much farther than 100 feet.
No, but he said he lost 100 feet from
He said he
here
got a
to
point,
there,
and there was a
that
tree
much
out
was
there.
eroded away.
Well, if you want a fire for effect, you measure it horizontally. And where the slope of the ground is very, very shallow, that could be 100 feet or 200 feet. The proper way to measure drawdown is vertically, not horizontally, because of the different shapes of the shoreline.
So that was a good one of my questions was what does anyone have a favorite or most memorable time on a boat on the lake? Anything
Karen's
that's-
dad does.
Yeah, that's Karen's dad.
Oh, we already have that.
Does anyone have a good water skiing story or running out
Ed
of
has the
gas?
best water skiing
I mean,
stories,
Ed
I
has
think.
tons of water skiing
I'm trying to
stories.
think, I don't know that you did it on your 80th birthday, but I do remember the 70th birthday. We had both you and Ted out on water skis. that
And
morning.
barefoot water ski on his
Yeah.
80th.
Well,
Yeah.
barefoot. But I think one of the more challenging and stories about having fun takes a bit of skill. The old Glendale Bridge had open floor decking, and it would sing when the cars would go across it. But when we would water ski, we had a contest. We would ski under the Glendale Bridge, and the slalom skier would try to cause a wake to go up through the floor. Now you got a few points if you got a good spray and it went up through the floor. If the spray hit the front of the car, you got a few more points. But if it came down on the middle of the windshield, you got a 10. And there's only been one or two times in my lifetime that anybody had a 10. But we kept going to beat hell because we didn't want to hear what that driver had to say.
Well, speaking of that bridge, when I lived there in the house that originally was built by her granddad, routinely in the summer, I would hear partying, people yelling at each other, and then in a little while you'd hear a splash.
Yeah.
And so if I got particularly annoyed, I'd get up and I'd flash the lights, and try to get them to, calm down. Well, it got worse when, I'll never forget this one time, I think I had my door open just to have the breeze come in, and they were standing on the bridge getting ready to jump off, because that was a rite of passage, to jump off the bridge. And they were talking to someone someone jumped in and they said, "Go ahead and swim on over to Karen Stock. It'll be okay."
That's Betsy.
And it was Betsy.
Oh, I don't think it was, but it was somebody who knew us well.
So if we could see a show of hands, how many of you have jumped off a bridge at Deep Creek Lake?
I haven't.
Oh, I
I jumped off yesterday.
I mainly like to sit under the bridge and fish, though. My sister and my cousin Paula, all of them were big skiers and boaters and all that, but I like to read, so I'd probably be on the dock reading or cleaning a cottage or painting or doing some kind of work. But yeah, I love to jump off the bridge. I thought that was really fun.
Karen, you never jumped.
I never did jump. Oh, I have a wild side, but not that kind of wild.
So Beverly,
Your
yours would have
White
been the
Rock history,
219 bridge.
Mine
Jumped
was
off.
definitely
Yeah.
the 219.
Okay.
Yes.
I think, yeah.
My bedroom at my grandparents', after my granddad died and I stayed with my grandmother, it was on the lake side. She was back
She
tucked
was
in
at
the
the quieter
rocks.
side.
Yeah, but if you remember the old playhouse, Blue Barn.
Oh, yeah.
Now every week I had to take my grandmother, but I loved it. I mean, I loved it too. I would have gone anyway, but she just loved the Blue Barn. But we'd be in bed pretty early because I worked at the edge of the lake, and I'd usually have to be there about 6 or 6:30. But there's no two ways about it. You woke up when the playhouse came out because all you heard was the clunk as they came across. You remember that? Just as they hit the bridge, a clunk, and then another one in the middle when it changed, clunk, and then when they came off the other end, it was a noisy bridge.
So it's like the Cheat Lake Bridge, which now
Yeah.
isn't there. But
It's gone too now, yeah.
Yeah,
I used to love that sound.
So yes, let me do a real quick commercial for our setting here. I don't think I mentioned that at the start of this. We're in the upper floor of the Transportation Museum in downtown Oakland, and this is the Deep Creek Room. So it's chock full of artifacts and pictures and memories, and donated by many of the people sitting on our panel here, and many others throughout the county. Lots of great stuff. So come by the museum and check it out. The bridges we were talking about are prominently pictured behind our panel here. How about one more trivia question?
Brother.
The last one. Where was the first dam on Deep Creek? So was it at where the current 219 bridge is, where the current Glendale bridge is, upstream of Red Run, or upstream of Green Lake Run? So the current dam of Deep Creek is not, this should be an easy one. I hope.
This is
Everyone
the
got
first
their
dam.
answer? So the answer was B, around the Glendale Bridge.
Got
There
that
was
one.
a small dam there where the Glendale Bridge is now that was for, I never say this word right, to raise fish. It's a pisciculture, but it was a fisheries dam to raise fish in. So there was.
I shouldn't interrupt, but did anybody else know Andy Newman? Speaking of fishing,
Andy?
Andy Newman. He lived on Cherry Creek, what I think it was Cherry Creek Road, and he was just this incredible old man. And I haven't really seen anybody who knew about him, and now I'm getting curious about him. So.
We'll put that on the list to track down. So everyone got that one right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did.
Ed knew
The
that.
first dam in Deep Creek Lake was built kind of where Cherry Creek comes into Deep Creek.
But it was on Cherry Creek. That was the trick question. So that dam was damming Cherry Creek, not Deep
I'm
Creek.
not too sure.
Okay. Right. I'll award you that one. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. But we'll look at some maps. I think there's some stuff.
That sounds like a good dialogue to have
Right.
with the
right.
beverage.
Well, the person who was in charge of the kind of the natural resources, but it was the fisheries at that time.
Mhm.
He had this lake built, and it flooded the McHenry, or the McHenry Cove. It flooded part of the McHenry Cove. And he also either owned or had leases on several hundred acres for a hunting retreat. and he would invite dignitaries from Annapolis up here. And it was before the dam was built. In fact, it was about the same era that the Miller Distillery. And the whiskey from the Miller's Distillery had been recognized as a very fine whiskey, and it was 8-year bonded whiskey.
And that was from accident, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
and he would serve his guests that after a day's hunting and fishing. And he even shipped a couple kegs of this whiskey to as far as Arizona to dignitaries there. I think that the dam was actually in Deep Creek and it included Cherry Creek, but
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Right, but it was around there. It was it was Lake Cleveland is what they called it because President Grover Cleveland visited there, and so there's a lot of great history of the area before Deep Creek Lake ever came here. We can talk a lot about the Grand Hotel era and the railroad stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that happened here even before the lake.
Speaking of that, Chris, before the lake, were there actual homes and structures on what is now the bottom of the lake?
Yes.
Or,
Oh, yes.
so, and they didn't really demolish those, correct?
Some they did, some they didn't. If you haven't, something that I'm about to do with some people is, and we started is looking at the old military lots, and I did it years ago. I need to do it again, but you can get a copy of. You remember from probably your junior high school age or something when people mustered out of the Army and they got 40 acres and a mule. Well, there are maps that exist that show the 40-acre plats all over Garrett County.
I have one.
And then you could do an overlay of where families combined them or bought them up, and so you can see what was there prior to the lake. And then you can do an overlay for what Eastern Land Corporation purchased and how much they took from each family, which families lost barns or houses and that kind of thing. And then you do an overlay of today, and the way it's grown up is absolutely incredible. But just within the last couple of weeks, I've dealt with the military lots.
I think a lot of them were demolished. My grandfather, while they had the general store, he had a big timber company, and that's one of the ways that he got into the lake property was that his workers had helped to deforest before they flooded the lake, and I think a lot of the houses did go.
He had an ice house.
Oh, he had an ice house, he had that limestone kiln, and I keep finding all this news about that. My father actually wrote 2 pages about the limestone kiln that I hadn't read until I pulled some stuff together to bring up here, and I was like, I had to read that in the Glade Star first, not from my father. And I thought, he talked about people coming with their buggies and all this stuff to haul it to their farms, and he didn't even know it, but his grandfather had been born in the Bittinger Jim Glatfeldy's farm, if you know where that is, Rock Lodge Road. And then they came to Bumblebee Road and sold it to Brenneman's, then moved on to over the general store and the Sang Run Road. But I just, in reading about the timbering, I hadn't really thought, like, what happened to where they flooded, and
Well, they got that timber out.
they got it out.
They got a lot out, but they left the stumps.
The stumps and
The
the
stumps
point
are
are still there.
And when we were growing up, that's what we did. We'd pick a
Yeah.
stump of summer and we'd burn it and have our
Yeah.
campfire and then douse
No, I
it and we'd
remember
relight it the next day. And
But
Yeah.
in reading about
now
it, I hated
it's
that.
Oh,
artwork.
don't do
People
that.
use it at their driveways.
Right.
But you're not allowed. Supposedly not allowed to pull them out of the lake.
Really?
Yeah.
Habitat.
Forgiveness,
Yeah.
permission.
Right.
There's it's tough. It's
Just
tough
don't
now.
get caught.
Yeah.
That's right.
I have a question. If you could go back and snap your finger and bring back any building, restaurant, just to walk in one more time tonight, what would it be from each of you? Any era, any building,
Does
restaurant?
it have to be commercial?
No, whatever.
No.
If you could pick one place that you were in Deep Creek,
Oh, I'd like to go back to Pop Kale's place where we kept a boat for 2 or 3 years.
okay, where on the
It's
lake?
on Lakeshore Drive, or I mean, Rock Lodge
Rock
Road.
Lodge Road. Tell them the story, the wedding story. Wasn't that a wedding story?
Which one?
Well, when you and Ted didn't you camp out in the boat there?
Yeah, Kale had a son, KV, and Ted France and I and KV were in civil engineering at WVU, and they have a surveying camp over at Terra Alta. And we were in different grades, but for this surveying camp, the three of us were there together. And KV said, "Will you guys come over and visit our cottage on Rock Lodge Road?" Blah blah blah. And we kind of bonded with his father, Pop Kale, and Pop Kale drank Ancient Age whiskey, which is probably Rotgut. I don't know. But anyway, it wasn't Duersmark or anything like that. But they had a railroad track that went up into a boathouse. So Pop Kale said, "Now you boys can set a tent up on my lawn, but I want it taken down when you get up in the morning. I don't want our house to look like a campsite." So we did that the first weekend. It was good, beautiful weather and everything. So the next weekend we just laid a tarp down on the ground and put our sleeping bags on it. And I think there was some rain that day, and that didn't suit us too well. But their boat that came up into the boathouse had these seats that folded down into a sunbather seat. Ed and I looked at each other and, well, wouldn't that be a heck of a lot easier to sleep on those seats than to... So we spent 2 or 3 years at Pop Kale's house, sleeping in his boathouse, and we'd pick up dates on the lake. We never took them to our cabin, but we'd go down the lake. That's our place over there.
So that's yours. You'd like to go back one more time.
One more time.
Yeah.
One more time.
I think Stone Tavern would be great to go back to, and it's just such a shame that it came down for $50,000, but probably my grandparents' house, because it was so much fun to be there. She was a major Republican woman in the county, and so, you know, Mac Mathias would come to town, and Martha Glotfeldy, anybody who was here stopped, and she just, you know, would stop her work, and that was the most important thing to her. You know, she might be washing and mangling sheets and checking people in, but, you know, when it came to politics, that was really important. And she even had a cookie cutter. Fanny Heinbaugh Johnson, my first cousin, reminded me that she had an elephant cookie cutter. And she always baked cookies to take to the Republican women's things. I mean, I never knew that. I mean, it was just interesting. But I'd probably like to go back there and sleep. And the house was divided. It was so interesting because my grandparents, now she grew up, her whole family was Brethren ministers, pastors, elders, or whatever, the Beagleys and the Merrills down at Appleton. So she had like 5 generations back of like Brethren. And she marries, he was born Malin John, but he changed it to Charles Malin, and otherwise known as Slick and CM. But here they were later after they had these kids, and the house was divided. And we didn't think it was weird at all. We would go in, and my grandfather lived in half of the house on the first floor and had the office over there. She had the kitchen, and then attached to the garage where there was all this other stuff for the cottages to do. And I would just like to go back in, and there was a door that connected. He cooked for himself, well, as most of his other friends cooked for him, but she always stopped and played gin rummy with all the cousins that would come, and a lot of them are gone now, unfortunately, but we just had such a good time in that house. And then just to have people were always coming. You know, everybody knew either my grandmother or grandfather, and it was just constant stimulation to meet people. And one of the things that strikes me about Garrett County is that how many people made friends, like my dad, say, at Accident grade school or whatever they called it in those days, elementary school, through high school, and until he was in his 90s, like at his 90th birthday party, it was like Raymond Grant, Skeeter Bowman, Ross Holiday, all these people who were locals. I can't even remember all of them, but they stayed friends and would get together and talk about Garrett County history, even when they were all ancient. It was so important to them. Remember when this happened and all that stuff. And so I'd like that house back because that was fun to hear people talk about the olden days.
And that's the house right there beside
Yes.
the bridge.
And it was the first commercial enterprise down at the lake, and then the tavern wasn't built until 1932. I live a century behind. But yes, it was, and my dad grew up there, and his younger brothers. And
About you, Karen?
So I don't want to walk in any place just to walk in. I want to go back to eat.
Okay.
So I
So
want to
where do
go
you
either
wanna
to Point View and to Red
Oh,
Run.
Point View. Yeah, Point View.
I loved going there and being able to sit out on the porch at Point
Oh,
View and
yes.
look at the water, and Ruth would, fix us some good food, and it's all about eating.
I remember we would go for Mother's Day brunch every year to Point View.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would have like the most elaborate spread before they tore it down. It was pretty spectacular.
Yeah,
Dan?
Point View.
Oh, sorry, go.
I'd be pretty much same as Karen, except that I would add that afterwards I'd want to go to Dale Harvey's at Sand Flat Road, which is now
And get ice cream.
Little Sandy's, and get ice cream.
Me too.
We all went to Dale Harvey's for ice cream.
And where was this on like?
Little Sandy's.
Oh, was it?
Sandy's
Okay,
is now.
okay.
Yeah, that was such a big treat
It was.
to me to go to Harvey's and get ice cream.
That was your activity after dinner, and
Yeah. It wasn't even related to food, but I remember when we would, the start of summer would come and we'd go to the trading post, and there were 4 girls, and we would all get a new sweatshirt, a new Deep Creek Lake shirt, and wear it all summer, and it was usually damp when we wore it because it never really dried completely.
Right.
But yeah, going to Harvey's and in my new sweatshirt.
Well, I'm about out of questions. I mean, if we got any audience questions or anything you all have thought of.
And I'd like to just add, you had talked about buildings here. I've only been here 21 years, so I'm the newbie, but I've seen pictures of the inside, I've seen pictures of the exterior. But if I could have one building back in this county that I would like to see, it'd be the old amphitheater.
Oh,
yeah,
Oh,
that would
yeah.
be spectacular.
That would be
I
wonderful.
mean, I've seen the pictures of the interior and the rafter system.
Astounding.
It's just amazing.
Mind-boggling.
It is, and but I would love to be able to walk into that.
It'd be neat to raise the shades here and look out at the old Oakland Hotel
yes.
up on the hill.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be nice.
Okay,
We can
well-
edit this out if we have to, because if we don't get the answer that I'm looking for. So many people complain, people complain about, I wish Deep Creek were like the good old days and there was nobody around. Did locals that weren't living around the lake really drive down and use the lake, or are they just bluffing?
I don't know, so it's not right.
Right,
That might be too political, but
I don't know.
Well, Karen, your family you said you're not.
Yeah,
not
we're,
from the lake,
well, yeah, I'm from the other end of the county.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
there-
the Friendsville end, but
Remember
yeah,
that
we came.
it wasn't just Deep Creek. There was Camp Minnetonka, and when you mentioned the Kales, the same Kale family, a lot of Tom Kale and his wife, a lot of them gravitated to Minnetonka, and there's a small core of people that still have little cabins out there, and that was a great place to go. But then a lot of them, like CV, came down to the lake.
I think in the olden days, Jay, I think a lot of locals came fishing
right.
to Deep Creek. That's what they did mostly. I mean, Joe Franklin, I think, told me you might know this better, that at one of his first jobs was driving the speedboat where they had the rides, you know, they gave speedboat ride for, I don't know, 5 cents or a nickel or
I think
a
it was
quarter.
50.
50, whatever it was. So that was a way to get
Yeah.
the general public, you know, who didn't have a dock or something like that. But I have a little story in terms of wrapping up. So Ann and I monopolized a little bit when we were talking about the house by the bridge that her dad built, and then I rebuilt, and we have stories there. So, and our families then ended up being joined. So in the early 2000s, one day, her cousin Bill Franklin and my stepdaughter Sarah Franklin had been seeing one another, living together, so on and so forth, for some time. And anyway, Bill decided it was time to legalize this. So he went to our house, which had been your grandparents' location, to officially ask Tom for her hand. And that conversation went well. And that night he called his dad, Joe, to tell him that he had been to see Tom that day and that he and Sarah were now engaged. And Joe says, Bill, you're not going to believe this, but I went to that same house 40-some years ago to ask for your mother's hand.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
High romance.
Yeah, there it is.
And I think that's a great,
Five children.
to
Yeah.
wrap up on.
That's pretty cool.
So, yeah, on behalf of the Historical Society and Taylor Made Deep Creek Vacations and Sales, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. And this has been a really great event. So, I've got our
Thank you very much.
award for Ed.
Ed,
Ed won.
Oh, I'm so glad.
it's real silver color, Ed.
Real silver color.
It's very nice.
So, and
Handmade.
then some freebies for everyone
Thank you, Chris.
who graciously attended. Some maps of the area.
Oh my God, no. I'm trying to get rid of all my maps, including my
Well,
military.
all right, you don't
maps
have
and
to
my
have. You don't have to
surveys
take
and-
them, but if you
Yeah.
like
That's the
them,
greatest map of Deep
those
Creek you'll
are
ever see.
all for you. Yes.
Thank you very much.
I
Okay.
already
Thank
did
you.
that. Ed already has.
Ed has
Everyone.
his
All
own.
your other old maps
You don't have
Ed
that.
has his own.
I have an attic full of maps that we'll have to see.
Don't feel beholden
No,
to
I
take
was going to
anything
bring all
home
my
with you.
maps to you.
So, thanks again, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks for
guys.
coming out.
Thank
This is
you.
a really
Okay,
great
thank you.
event. And you have that